Hello friends, very good evening. Welcome to the Hindu editorial analysis. The title of today's editorial is The Uprising. What is the meaning of uprising? Uprising is an act of rebellion, act of revolt, act of people turning against the government. When people turn against the government, we call it uprising, people uprising, right? A formal process should bring in change in Sri Lanka and not a public uprising. Why are people revolting against the government? Why are they protesting? Because they want a change in government. They don't want the current president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. People want a change in the presidency. People also want a change in the prime minister. But the change in president and the prime minister should happen according to a formal process and not because of violent people revolt. That is the meaning of this particular sentence. Let's go in detail in this editorial. But before that, I would like you to watch my video on economic crisis in Sri Lanka. I did a separate video on economic crisis in Sri Lanka. You can find this in comments section. In this video's comment section you will find it. You can also find it in our Telegram channel. So you can join our Telegram channel. You will have a lot of free PDFs and also free content in the Telegram channel. So you can also find this in comment section, and this video was uploaded just today. Public wrath is paving the way for momentous changes in Sri Lanka. What is the meaning of wrath? Wrath is extreme anger. People are extremely angry, right? The anger of people is paving the way for momentous. Momentous means of great importance. So great important changes are happening in Sri Lanka. Why? Because of people's anger. People's anger is paving the way for some important changes in Sri Lanka. The ongoing protests, the protests that are happening right now against the precipitous fall. What is the meaning of precipitous? Precipitous means steep, sudden and steep fall in the island nation's economic fortunes. The country's economic fortunes have taken a hit. They are in economic crisis, because of which people in Sri Lanka are struggling. The prices of all commodities have gone up. They are unable to get access to the daily needs as well, right? See, the ongoing protests against the precipitous fall in island nations' economic fortunes have reached a crescendo. What is the meaning of crescendo? Crescendo means climax. The protests have slowly grown in intensity. They have grown in intensity, and finally they reached climax. The intensity has reached climax. It reached final stage. What happened in Sri Lanka 2 days back? All the protesters, they went and they occupied the secretariat. They also occupied president's official residence. They were enjoying in president's swimming pool, right? So these things happened on 9th of this particular July. So these protests have reached to that level wherein people stormed president's office and secretariat as well. This is the final stage, you can say. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, whose secretariat was overrun. What is the meaning of overrun? Overrun means storm a place, go and occupy a place in large numbers by thousands of people, and his official residence was occupied by boisterous protesters. Boisterous means noisy. Protesters means people who are protesting against the government. And Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, whose private residence was set ablaze, which means set on fire. His private residence was set on fire by these protesters. And both of them have expressed readiness to resign. Both of them have expressed willingness or readiness to resign. They said, we are ready to resign. We will step down from our respective positions. That's what they said. Mr. Rajapaksa The main target of the people's unbridled anger. What is unbridled? Unrestricted, uncontrolled. People's main target is who? Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, has conveyed his willingness to resign on 13th July, while Mr. Vikramasinghe is awaiting an alternative all-party government to be ready to take over before he steps down. On one hand, you have this president who was ready to resign on 13th July, whereas this Prime Minister Vikramasinghe is awaiting an all-party government. Look at this. If Ranil Vikramasinghe resigns or steps down from his position, someone else has to take over, right? Who will take over? So now they are contemplating to form an all-party government. What is the meaning of that? All the political parties in Sri Lanka will come together and form government. It is not going to be a government by a single party. It is going to be a government by all parties put together. That is the alternative. So he is awaiting this. He is waiting for it. Right, he is waiting for it to take over before he steps down. It is now fairly clear that the people have not been pacified by the formation of a new regime under Mr. Vikramasinghe. If you remember, in Sri Lanka, we used to have Mahindra Rajapaksa as the Prime Minister, Gotabaya Rajapaksa as the President. Both are brothers. Since public were very angry on Rajapaksas, what did this Gotabaya Rajapaksa do? He asked his brother Mahindra Rajapaksa to resign. In Sri Lanka, President is more powerful than Prime Minister, unlike India. President in Sri Lanka has more powers compared to Prime Minister. So President Gotabaya Rajapaksa asked his brother Mahindra Rajapaksa to resign, and in his place he has appointed Ranil Vikramasinghe as the Prime Minister. It looks like so Gotabaya Rajapaksa felt, now that I asked my own brother to resign and brought in a new person in his place as the Prime Minister, people would be okay. People's anger would cool down. That's what he expected. Pacify means reduction of anger. If you are pacifying someone means you are trying to reduce their anger. You are trying to reduce their anger. But it looks like people have not been pacified, which means people are still not happy. Even though your younger brother resigned as Prime Minister, we are still not happy. We want you to step down. Who is that Who is that you? Gotabaya Rajapaksa. People want Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down. Even this Vikramasinghe was a man appointed by Rajapaksa. So they don't even want this Vikramasinghe also to be the Prime Minister. That's what people want. The boiling over of public anger on July 19 indicates their utter dissatisfaction with his government's efforts to address their day-to-day problems. So this phrase boiling over is very, very important. What happens when water boils? Imagine you put some water in a utensil and heat it. Once it reaches boiling temperature, water flows down, right? It becomes uncontrollable. And it comes falling down, which means it becomes uncontrollable when it reaches boiling temperature. Similarly, whenever you see this word boiling over, it means public anger became uncontrollable. When any emotion becomes uncontrollable, you call it boiling over. It got boiled over. That's how we use the word. Right, the boiling over of public anger, which means the uncontrolled public anger on July 19, indicates, what does it indicate? Utter dissatisfaction. Utter means complete. They were completely dissatisfied with the government because dissatisfaction with his government's efforts. Whose government? Vikramasinghe government's efforts to address their day-to-day problems. They could not address their day-to-day problems, because of which they were still not happy. They were not pacified. There were questions about Mr. Vikramasinghe's political legitimacy to hold the office, given that he belongs to a party with no elected representative in the legislature and he himself being a nominee based on its vote percentage. So this is a peculiar thing specific to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka and India are not same. Their electoral system and our electoral system are quite different. In India, the number of seats a political party gets is completely based on their performance in elections, which means performance in election in each constituency. Out of all 543 constituencies, whichever party wins maximum gets to rule. You know that whichever party gets more than 50% gets an opportunity to rule. So their seats in parliament, their seats in Lok Sabha is completely dependent on their performance in individual elections in each constituency. But in Sri Lanka, it is slightly different. Pay attention. So in Sri Lanka, what happens is a party gets some seats based on their total vote percentage. Based on their total vote percentage. In sometimes what happens, a party might have good vote percentage across the country, but they might not win any seats. They might not win any seats in any constituency. In such situations, Sri Lanka follows this particular system of awarding seats or giving seats based on vote percentage. If you had a certain amount of votes, certain percentage of votes, then you are eligible to have these many seats. So according to their vote percentage, the party that Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe belonged to got one seat, and he was nominated as the MP. Right? He was nominated as the member of Sri Lankan legislature based on the vote percentage that his party got across the country. However, despite the arrival of some overseas aid and commencement of process for International Monetary Fund bailout, there has been no significant relief for people, especially the poor and the vulnerable. So very, very important sentence. Now Sri Lanka is in crisis. If you see my economic crisis video, you will understand that Sri Lanka is struggling. You will understand that Sri Lanka is struggling to get income. They don't have any foreign currency left. Their central bank is short of foreign currency. They are unable to import food. They are unable to import oil. So they are depending on overseas aid, which means they are depending on help by other countries like India and China. Now they are getting some aid from the overseas, and also they have reached out to International Monetary Fund for help. Whenever you have shortage of foreign currency, you will have balance of payment situation. In my previous videos, you would have seen I explained this concept called balance of payments, wherein the country's available foreign currency is not sufficient to pay for imports. If a country, imagine, whenever a country imports something, if a country imports something, they have to pay for it, right? When you are importing, you have to pay in foreign currency, right? If you don't have enough foreign currency, then how will you pay for imports? You will not be able to pay. So this kind of scenario is called balance of payment situation, wherein the foreign currency that you have is not sufficient to pay for your imports or pay for your foreign bills. So that is the situation of Sri Lanka right now. So they have approached International Monetary Fund for help. IMF is there to help countries in such situations. Bailout means bringing this country out of this problem. Bailing out means pulling someone out of a problem. So IMF is going to commence formal process for bailout. So it will start giving money to Sri Lanka, but they will set certain conditions and Sri Lanka has to follow those conditions. Apart from these two, there has been no significant relief for people. So people are not facing any more relief. Relief means break from these problems. If you have pain, you apply pain balm, you will face relief, right? That is relief. Especially who is facing problem? The poor and the vulnerable. Especially the poor in Sri Lanka and those who are at higher risk. Those who are jobless, those who are at higher risk because of this economic crisis. I'll tell you one example to remember this word, vulnerable. So this is a very important word which keeps coming in editorials. I'll give you one example. You will easily understand this. So you are a person staying in slum area, okay, and there is another person staying in highly sanitized or posh area, good area. Now if I say, if you take malaria for example, who is more at risk because of malaria? Is the person in posh area or is the person in slum area? You will say slum area person, because there is no sanitization there. So so he is more likely to get malaria. So you will say this person is vulnerable. Vulnerable means he is at a higher risk. He is at a higher risk to contract malaria compared to this person living in posh area. So this is the meaning of vulnerable. Vulnerability means your ability to suffer. If you are more vulnerable, which means you are more likely to suffer. People living in coastal areas are more vulnerable to tsunamis. People living in slum areas are more vulnerable to diseases like malaria or dengue. Right? This is how we need to understand the word vulnerable. Here the vulnerable means people who are more likely to lose because of this economic crisis. Those people are vulnerable people. So they are struggling. The next few days are crucial for the country. Why? As it will show whether the political class can rise above its differences and put in place an alternative regime that can steer the country towards economic recovery. Now Sri Lanka is expecting an all-party government. What is the meaning of all-party government? Right? Different political parties coming together and forming government. So when more political parties with different ideological differences, right, with different ideologies, if they come together, they will have a lot of differences among themselves. Now it will be interesting to see whether these political classes or political parties can rise above their differences. Right? Let's set aside all the differences that we have and let's work together for the welfare of Sri Lanka, and let's steer means direct the country towards economic recovery. How do you remember this word steer? Steering, you know, right? For car, bus, everything has steering. What does the steering do? It provides direction to the vehicle. Steer means to provide direction. Steer the country towards economic recovery. Under the country's constitution, the Prime Minister and then the Speaker of Parliament are in line to act as President if the highest office falls vacant. If President's office falls vacant, who should take over it? According to the Constitution of Sri Lanka, it is Prime Minister. But unfortunately, even the Prime Minister is also going to vacate now. So who is next? The Speaker of Parliament. So the way out seems to be that the current Speaker, Mahindra Yapa Abeyavardhana, takes over as President so that within 30 days, Parliament can elect a new President by secret ballot. Secret ballot. Right, Parliament can elect a new President by a secret ballot. So current Speaker will most likely take over as the President, and then within 30 days, Parliament will elect a new President by a secret ballot. So that's what they are trying to say here. However, these moves will be contingent on the resignations actually materializing. Whatever the resignations they are planning, the resignation of PM, the resignation of President, first of all, they have to happen. Materialize means they have to actually happen. Only when they happen, these moves will happen. Whatever the Speaker becoming President and a new President being elected within 30 days, all these things, when will they happen? When the current President and the current Prime Minister resign. Contingent means dependent on, conditional on. Only when these things happen, the other thing will happen. Any delay in creating conditions for the emergence of an alternative may not go down well with the public. If the government delays, if Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who is the current President, and Wickramasinghe, who is the Prime Minister, if they delay in resigning, if they do not change the government, and it may not go down well with the public. Public are already angry. They are waiting for both of them to resign immediately. And it may lead to more unsavory incidents. Unsavory means unpleasant. If they don't resign quickly, if it doesn't lead to immediate change of government, and public may become angry again, it might lead to similar kind of incidents. They've set the Prime Minister house on fire. So imagine what kind of things might happen in future if they don't immediately respond. The occupants of the two main officers will have to make their decisions early so that country's transition to a stable regime can be easy. Right? The occupants of two main offices, which means president and prime minister, will have to make their decisions, their resignation decisions quickly so that country's transition to a stable regime means government, stable government can be easy. Only then the country can transition itself to a stable government. It is possible to argue that mere regime change may redound to nobody's benefit. You might argue, you might say, just because you are changing government, will it help anyone? What is the meaning of redound? Redound means contribute. Contribute to nobody's benefit, which means it will not contribute to anybody's benefit. So it is not going to help anyone. Just because you are changing government, nothing will change on the ground. It will achieve nothing more than mollifying the masses for now. All these masses, all the people who are angry, they will just cool down. If you are changing government, they will cool down. It doesn't mean all their economic problems will immediately go away, right? They will not go away. All the problems will remain. The new government has to come, it has to work with people, it has to understand people's concerns, and it has to bring get Sri Lanka out of the economic crisis. And it will not ease the economic travails of the people. Travails means problems. Immediately, just because you are changing government, it will not change the fortunes of people immediately. However, it is always better that a formal process is set in motion to effectuate change than it being left to the exigencies of public uprising. So it is important that we need to bring in a formal process, right, to effectuate change and bring about the change, rather than leaving it to the urgent demands of the public. Now public are angry, they are demanding that these two should resign. Instead of leaving it to public demand, these people, Rajapaksa and Wickramasinghe, they have to start the formal process. What is the formal process? President should resign, Prime Minister should resign, and Speaker should take over as President, and immediately within 30 days there has to be a new President to be elected, and all party government should form, and one of them should become Prime Minister. So this is the formal process. If you don't do it immediately, and people will be angry again. So instead of waiting for people to become angry and they doing more such unpleasant incidents, it is better both of them step down immediately and start the process. It will also impart some much needed political legitimacy to whoever will emerge as President and Prime Minister and steer the country through troubled times. Now, since people themselves are asking for a change, whoever becomes President or whoever becomes Prime Minister, it is considered that they are becoming Prime Minister and President with people's acceptance. Today, the President that we have, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, he lost people's confidence. Because he is the person who appointed Wickramasinghe, and Wickramasinghe himself could not win elections. So people did not have any confidence in Wickramasinghe also. Now both of them are going away because people are not happy. New President and new Prime Minister will come, and it is assumed that people have confidence in the new system. The country cannot afford a fresh election now, nor can it be without a leadership. Can they afford a fresh election? No, because it is very expensive. And can it remain without a leader? No, they are already struggling. They are in crisis. They need to have a leader immediately. So they should have a leader immediately. Right. So that's what this editorial says. Take care. Bye-bye.